My grandfather was quite an entrepreneurial personality. He'd gotten a couple of years of college education, came to Columbia, South Carolina from living in Mount Carmel, South Carolina, a little small country town. And he got involved in a number of different businesses. And through the course of time, he eventually owned a couple of car dealerships at one point in time. We've heard that he also started the first laundromat in Columbia, South Carolina. But eventually he got a Firestone distributorship. At the beginning of World War II, you couldn't sell tires, and he either turned in the franchise or sold it, I'm not sure which, and semi-retired to his country house in Neces, South Carolina.
We had as I recall, 160-acre farm back in the area where the family was. It's about 30 miles out of Columbia, not far, to grow food for the war effort. And so that's what he did. He sold all his businesses.
He was still a fairly young man. He was in his late 50s at that point in time. So after the end of the war, he was looking for a business to invest in. He supposedly saw an advertisement in the newspaper from a family who was trying to sell the Terminix franchise. He was concerned, the story goes, that there would be a return to economic hard times, or if not the depression that had existed prior to the war, that at the conclusion of the war, those hard times would return. He thought people would be inclined to protect their most valuable asset in difficult times, and that protecting their homes from termites would be something people would be willing to invest in. So he and his 3 children got money together and purchased that franchise.
I think it's a very wise decision. So we ended up being in the family business from that point on.
There was a company called Bruce who made hardwood flooring out of Memphis, Tennessee, who through some series of events had become aware of their flooring being destroyed by termites, and they hired a young chemist to research methods of protecting the flooring. He came up with a chemical that could impregnate wood and to provide for protection of structures from termites, and he got a patent on that chemical, which was the first patented termiticide, and it was named Terminix. In order for Bruce to sell this new chemical they had gotten a patent on, they licensed different franchises around the country. And that was in 1927. The franchise that my family owns was existing at least as early as the early 1930s. Don't know for sure. We've got some old pictures of trucks with license plates, look like about 1932 and 33, so at least that old. But my family did not get involved until about 1947, when my grandfather bought into the business. Then when my grandfather bought the Terminix franchise in 1947, my father came to work with his father at that point in time. My uncle, Tom Knox, would eventually come into the business about 1952. My grandfather had suffered a heart attack at that point in time, and my Uncle Tom came back and joined my father in working in the business. Both these men had gotten business degrees from the University of South Carolina and worked for commercial credit, and they were very knowledgeable about the nature of business and their approach to it. Very ethical men about how they wanted to work business. And they were both ambitious and wanted the business to grow. 2 distinct personalities. It's simplistic to say that my father was more the finance accounting side of it, Mr. Inside, and Tom was more the outside operational element of the business. But that's a general nature of the symbiotic relationship they had with each other. Over the course of time, they were reaching out to find ways to grow the business. They developed a relationship with a man named Jack Galloway in the late 1950s. Jack was a franchisee also of Terminix International. He apparently gave them insight on how to work a profit-sharing arrangement with the managers in the business. It's a management approach, so these branch managers, as they were called at that time, would have a vested interest in having to grow the business profitably. And this was a significant, fundamental aspect of the Terminix business that we operate over the course of time as we've grown and developed it, that core philosophy of trying to have individuals be invested in trying to grow the profits of the company. There's an individual named Bob Williams. He had been instrumental in introducing what he called a key man business model. And this business model provided for having a Terminix representative have a fixed territory. And he would do all things for the customers in that territory. He was both the salesperson and the service person.
Prior to that, we had what we call a chief inspector, who was a supervisor who sold the work. He didn't do the work. He sold the work, and then you had a termite trader who did the work. The key man idea was that there would be a Mr. Terminix representative, and he would do the termite control and the pest control, and he would sell it. And if he was going to do it, then if you want to build trust, knowing that the guy who sold it was the one that was going to do it, and that he would be responsible for the relationship, was very appealing to me, because it gave people a great sense of confidence of being somebody, not just a guy that goes in, turns right and sprays a little bit. He was Mr. Terminix in that community. And so it was a huge breakthrough. We had experimented with an annual pest control service where we'd treat very thoroughly, inside the house, in the attic, outside, and underneath the house. And we call it the four-way. And so we had this four-way procedure that we'd guarantee for a year. And I'd done some research, and we averaged about 2.5 reservices during the year. Bob came along with this idea of doing essentially the same kind of service and going 4 times a year, once every 3 months.
And you would be able to spend more time at the structure. You would service in the crawl space, you would service around the outside of the house, you would service inside the house, and you would service in the attic. So you were doing an all-encompassing service to the customer, the 4 ways being the 4 aspects I just mentioned, but also it's seasonal 4 times a year. The customer did not have to be as inconvenienced to be at home 12 times a year when you came to service the property, only 4 times a year. And this was very beneficial to us in that even though you could stay longer at a customer's house, an individual service technician could service more customers.
So you could have 3 times as many customers as you could one person handle. If you go monthly and you got 100 customers, you got 100 places to go every month. If you've got 100 customers and you go quarterly, you got 33 places to go every month. And so he could actually service a much larger book of business just by himself. And we found that it worked, and it was very rewarding to all of us, and so it's been remarkable.
By and large, the backbone of our business is still this key man approach. It's somewhat of the old divide and conquer. We continue to split routes. We have to try to grow, have everybody invested in selling, try to get everybody in the whole company involved in some way in growing the business. As they sell and grow the business, they reach a point of maximum capacity they can handle. You split a route, hire another employee, and continue to grow. Ultimately, a branch gets so large, we find there are certain points at which it's more efficient to split a branch off, to move off into a new territory, and we continue to grow the business in this way. The nature of most of our business is that they don't see what we do. If we're treating for termites, we're going underneath the crawl space of the house, and they normally don't have really much knowledge about what we're doing. It's not like we were painting their house where they can see the results, or we're putting fertilizer out in their lawn and they can see the grass turn green. They've got to rely upon what we're doing, have some degree of confidence that we're doing the right thing and we're indeed protecting their property, and more immediately they are getting value for the money they're laying out for the work to be done. So you have to go through all the aspects of trying to ensure that there is a trusting relationship that exists there, and there's a name brand reliability that exists with the customer, and having a guarantee that stand behind your work is an important part of that. Terminix in about 1957 introduced what it called a protection contract, where it provided if you got termites back in your house after they had treated it and they did damage, that they would pay for the repair of those damages up to a certain amount.
It was the first company in the country to offer a damage repair guarantee. Before, if you'd have a contract with a customer, and if you had a reinfestation, you'd come back, they'd pay you an annual fee, and you would provide a service, but you didn't accept responsibility for any damage. Terminix offered the first $5,000 damage guarantee, and so that has changed over the years from 5, then it went to 25, then it went to 50 as I recall, and now it's unlimited.
So early 1970s were very instrumental. The introduction of radios is hard to overstate the impact they could have on operation, that you could have communication with people. Previously, a service person would have to stop and perhaps ask a customer if they could use their telephone or go find a payphone somewhere. The idea that you could have instantaneous communication, you could direct employees, have accountability where they were, was just a wonderful boom to how to be more efficient and have accountability in operations.
That revolutionized the way we were able to communicate with people. Before, if they went out to Buchanan Drive to service an account, and somebody else on Buchanan Drive called to say they had a problem, you had no way of communicating with them at all, unless they just happened to pick the phone up and call you, that somebody a block away needed service too. And so you had a situation where it was very inefficient. They'd come back to the office, you'd tell them, hey, guess what, you got to go back out and do this account. With radios, it changed the whole ballgame. And so that was a very revolutionary time.
Simultaneously with the development of radios was the advent and the purchase of a computer system. It's hard to understand the nature of the service business where you have a large number of transactions that transpire with relatively low dollar amount. How do you keep accountability for these work orders or tickets being worked on a monthly basis and have the record keeping that goes along with them as the business continues to grow?
You had your customer files, you could just feed the whole mess into the machine or machines, and it would separate things. You could program it to separate your routes, you separate your customers, and then the machine would print the work orders out in, with continuous printed forms as opposed to hand doing every one of them. So I mean, it's invaluable.
So these two tools, that of the introduction of radios in trucks, having direct operational control and accountability, the use of computers for help generate work orders and having reporting and accountability also there, were instrumental in helping to grow the business. In the early 1980s, Tom Fortson came in, became president, and I became the executive vice president. He had been living in Charlotte, North Carolina for approximately 10 years prior to that. At that time, Tommy and I really started working much more closely together. We're two different personalities, but we share common values and principles. And he is, like myself, I hope, a very person of great integrity. He's a very compassionate person. We both are very respectful of employees and the nature of our business. We both are trying to do the right thing. Now within that, he's much more of an extrovert than I am. He's much more comfortable for going out and mingling and talking with people. But it's neither black or white, either one of us. People used to think maybe he was more the operational type guy and I was more the numbers guy. But that's a disservice to him to think that he did not understand the numbers and the P&L side of it. And it's a little bit perhaps of a disservice to me to think that I didn't understand the people side of it. But I think because of the different natures of our personalities, we each brought more value to the combination of our perspectives of the business. And together, we're a more valuable team than we would have been independently. We continue to try and reach out and grow, but it's very difficult to start a business from scratch in a new market area. So the possibility of making an acquisition gives you a leapfrog over the course of time that you can get a foothold in an operational area. We made one in Augusta, Georgia. It was actually Augusta, North Augusta, and Wright Pest Control. It was a huge acquisition for us at that point in time. But this is a market area within our franchise territory where we had basically no business. We instantaneously, by making this acquisition, got a foothold in the marketplace and we were able to grow that business. About 1995, Dow Chemical came with a new technology of using a termite bait system. This was a radically different approach as opposed to the traditional bait process of trying to do a ground treatment around a structure, which involved a lot of knowledge of how construction happened and how the avenues of approach and the termites may take to get into construction, having put out the right amount of chemical, trying to drill into voids. It was a very heavy-duty process, a lot of knowledge. Termite baiting system basically was a process of trying to capture termites, in essence, around a structure by certain stations being placed around a structure and then inserting a bait into these stations which they could take back into their colony and kill out the colony. Totally different approach. Again, I think because of the reputation of our business, our company was one of the first businesses in the country to start using Sentricon. I have heard that we have supposedly, I think, the first job that was sold to use Sentricon within our territory. This really changed the nature of the business and how you perform it, and what equipment goes on your trucks, and what training you have for your people, and what's the frequency of going out to service houses. There were so many things that changed the result of Sentricon.
It was a complete departure from what we had done in the past. And with Terminix, they used a lot of liquid termiticides. And so when Dowger Sciences introduced a termite bait into the market, it was new and revolutionary. And as the largest company in the Carolinas, Terminix became the benchmark of our success. And a lot of our innovations came because of the leadership here at Terminix.
With my father's advancing age and in the early 2000s, I realized I needed some more additional support, particularly when the company would need it as it continued to grow and he would no longer be able to provide that service. I hired Susan Douglas to come on board to work as our Vice President of Finance. Again, in a most critical position, the person who's got the keys to the safe is the Chief Financial Officer. It's got to be somebody you have complete confidence and trust in, but also somebody who with intellect and talent and knowledge and professionalism can do their job. And she fulfilled that role and has been a valuable ally. Likewise, as time passed and Tom Fortson got to the point in his life that he wanted to be spending more time and doing some other things than working full time, he'd stepped aside into a position of being vice chair of the board. I became chairman of the board. Tommy's son, Scott Fortson, had worked with us since the late 1980s in various roles, working from being a key man in one of our operations to ultimately being a regional manager in one of our successful regions in the low country of South Carolina, then being a vice president of operations. Scott was promoted to being president of the company. In a similar time frame, we're fortunate enough to have my son, Trevor Knox, who had worked for the company for a number of years in various roles also, from running a route and being a key man to working on our region staff in a various training capacity, while he also got his MBA from University of South Carolina. He was promoted to a position of Vice President of Sales and Marketing. Again, with more family members, my nephew, Ryan Cobb, had also been with the company for a number of years. Ryan had worked also on a route for a while. Ryan had an interesting career where he had gone to Duke and got a divinity degree and ultimately was an ordained Lutheran minister. He had decided that his calling was not to be in full-time ministry, to come back into the business. He came to work with us, and as I say, he started running a route, and ultimately he moved into our Human Resources Department. He has now been promoted to our position of Vice President of Human Resources. So these are some very, very competent people with great experience in the business, a wonderful synergy of talent and personalities and character that help to yield the stability and the growth and the soundness of this business and will be the foundations for its future growth.
Mr. Tom and Mr. Marion, when I came to the company and started working with the corporate office, they were still here, and the leadership was changing to Tommy and Lex. And I can still vividly remember Mr. Tom and Mr. Marion walking around. They'd carry these big tapes of paper off their calculators, and they'd come into Tommy and Lex's office asking questions about the financials and had they figured this out yet. And now I'm watching the next transition of Tommy and Lex are still here in leadership roles, but now Tommy's son Scott and Lex's son Trevor are starting to take on more leadership roles within the company. Sometimes it's challenging just because everything's so different between the generations, but getting back to the spirit of family, they recognize that they're family, but they also recognize that they have a responsibility to continue to provide jobs for 1,200 plus employees, to service the communities that they're in, and they've seamlessly done each transition, and that's pretty cool.
It's been very fulfilling to watch all of that develop, and it's mostly fulfilling at 77 years of age to sit here and see 4 generations of your family involved and getting along, which is, I can tell you, how many people I've helped through crises in this industry who are having fights with their dad because they don't get along, or their granddad's not good to them, or their mama's not good to them, and they want to quit and leave the business. And how many fathers are having to sell the business because they don't have anybody to leave it to, And so now we've got the younger generation involved in the business, and it's just extremely fulfilling and pleasing.
When my grandfather and his children bought the business, it did a little better than $90,000 in business in 1947. It took about 20 years until approximately 1969 until it did $1 million in business. And this was a significant milestone. I've always remembered my father telling me he couldn't believe their little bug business had done $1 million in business in 1969. It happened to be my senior year in college. And the business continued to grow over the course of time, and I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but until probably in the early 90s we were doing approximately 20 million. And then sometime shortly after 2001, I think we reached the $50 million mark. And then it was just a few years ago, I think in 2012, that we reached the $100 million mark. So we are, within our business, we're a pretty big operation. The pest control industry is a large business. It requires little capital to get into it. There are a number of businesses, anywhere from 15 to 16 to 17,000 pest control companies in the United States. Our business is supposedly ranked in the top 10 of those businesses, and we're probably the only one in that top 10 that has a fixed geographical territory where we cannot spread out. There's nothing proprietary about our knowledge that we have, the chemical we have, or the tools that we have. The only distinction we can make is in the quality of our people and the service we render with those tools and that knowledge. So it is the people. The bugs are the same for us as it is for our competitors. The distinction is going to be in us and how we approach the business and deliver that service is going to make us be successful.
Terminix Service is unique because even though they're a $120 million plus company, they feel like a small company. You don't walk into here, you're not intimidated. You don't feel like you're walking into the mouth of the beast, so to speak. And here, I'm just as comfortable walking into Lex's office and saying hello as I am walking into anybody else's office. And I don't think there's many companies that you can walk into the man running the show into his office and give him a hug and, hey, how are you, as comfortably as you do. And it's not just unique to me. And so you're just very comfortable here.
Terminix is today, it's culturally run like a very small company. In the industry, it's referenced as mom and pop sort of a company, but even though it's the largest company in the state of South Carolina, it still has that sort of a family culture that is really unique to a company this size.
To say what's different about our business from any other pest control business is always going to come back to the people who operate the business, and I'm talking about the people in the trucks. We have an organizational chart that we have had printed up and placed in most of our offices, and it's an upside-down pyramid organizational chart, as opposed to traditional organizational chart where you may have a president, a vice president, and people underneath them going down and spread out to the employees. The visualization here is trying to emphasize the top of our pyramid chart is our customer, and underneath that is our frontline employees, those individuals who are out there in those trucks and providing service to our customers. Under that is our office support personnel who are answering the telephones and helping to coordinate the service being done. And then below them are the regional offices, and even further below them are the corporate offices. It may seem quaint and maybe even corny, but it's trying to emphasize the importance of that direct customer relationship between our frontline employee and the individual customers. We've sometimes joked that it didn't matter if it was myself or Tom Fortson or Scott Fortson or other officers of the company. We could be the most wonderful business people in the world, but if the service man that shows up at the customer's homes has mud on their feet, that's who Terminix is. And so the importance of the quality of services rendered on frontline service determines the success of the business on a daily basis.
I was a regulatory official in the state of South Carolina for 30 years. And I can tell you without any reservation, this is probably the best company in the state of South Carolina. It's the biggest and it's the best. And you would have to ask yourself, how can that be? Well, if it weren't for those things we just talked about, though, that culture in this company to do things the right way, that wouldn't be the case.
I have enjoyed working throughout my life at Terminix, mainly because of the people. I have the association. It was family initially, which helped to bring me aboard, and I enjoyed that, but also the nature of all the people we work with on a daily basis. It's a corny expression to say it's a people business, but it truly is. And it's the people I work with each day that bring me joy and pleasure.
I've always been very personally involved with our people, and so has Lex, so has it's just something we've always done. And it's been important for us and to do that. And so I think people really do feel a part of things. I mean, I honestly love the people that I work with. Been that way for 50 years. So appreciate every one of them. And I think they know that, and therefore there's a reciprocation there.
The story of Terminix is not the story of Lex Knox and Tommy Fortson, or even a few other people. It's many, many people coming in every day and contributing and trying to do the right thing. We may sit behind the big desk in Columbia and have the big titles and all, but it's still the people out there on the trucks. It's still the people who work around the corporate office who work each day. And it's all the people who work in our training and technical departments that train our people how to do the work. It's those operational managers out there throughout those offices that are conveying the message to the people and setting the standard and waving the flag every day. They're the heroes that make Terminix be successful. It's not what we do sitting in Columbia.